Recently, multiple media outlets have reported that the US military has begun withdrawing from its largest base in the northeastern Syria. Following coordination with US forces, the Syrian transitional government has taken over the Shaddadi base in Hasaka province and the Al-Tanf garrison in the south. When the news broke, many people's first reaction was, is the United States finally scaling back? But if that's true, why is the US simultaneously surging forces into the Middle East, assembling a massive fleet of at least 10 warships, including the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln? If the US is truly shrinking its overseas military footprint, why are its carrier strike groups still patrolling the South China Sea? Why are its stealth fighters constantly scrambling from runways in Japan? And why do its nuclear submarines remain silently perched beneath the Arctic Sea? How can a single nation's military be everywhere at once, from the deserts of the Persian Gulf to the island chains of the Pacific and the icy barrens of Greenland, deploying jets, carriers, and even nuclear weapons simultaneously? What is the true scale of the military web spun by the self-proclaimed world police? Welcome to Hello Liliana. In this episode, we will talk about the hidden map of the empire, decoding the global web of the US military bases. The trillion-dollar ledger. In 2024, US military spending hit $997.3 billion, teetering on the edge of the trillion-dollar mark. Approximately 9% of that annual budget is dedicated solely to the cost of overseas bases. How and where this money is spent is actually deeply tied to the volatility of global markets. Take January of this year as an example. As soon as rumors surfaced about personnel withdrawing from a US base in Qatar, tensions between the US and Iran spiked, and WTI crude oil prices surged in response. Days later, as the situation cooled down, oil prices quickly gave up those gains. Every move at a US base acts as a pulse sent through the pipelines of geopolitical risk, directly impacting global markets and, ultimately, your cost of living. In today's episode, we are going to ask, how many military bases does the US have around the world, both the visible and the invisible ones? Why does the overall military budget keep rising even when they are withdrawing from the certain region? How much money does the US burn every year to maintain this six-continent military empire? Before we dive in, remember to subscribe the channel, leave a comment, hit the like button, and share this with your friends. Let's get right into it. What exactly is an overseas military base? In simple terms, it means the US is parking its troops, planes, warships, and sometimes even nuclear weapons right on someone else's doorsteps. These facilities generally fall into a few categories: permanent home bases, forward deploy outposts, and cooperative security locations, where the US only has access rights, not ownership. The US military footprint spans 6 continents, everywhere except Antarctica, across 39 countries and territories. They are primarily concentrated in 3 strategic zones: the Russian periphery, the Middle East, and East Asia. Why build bases all over the world? If you just look at a map, the US seems perfectly secure. It dominates the North American continent, is flanked by 2 vast oceans, and has no powerful enemies to its north or south. But this geographic advantage is also a strategic disadvantage. It is simply too far from the center of the world island. What is the world island? It's a geopolitical concept referring to the contiguous landmass of Europe, Asia, and Africa. Historically, whoever controls the core of the world islands dictates global affairs. However, the US is tucked away in the Western Hemisphere and is technically on the margins. So, how do they overcome this disadvantage? They came up with a blunt but highly effective solution: build bases in everyone else's neighborhood. Through a network of military strongholds across Europe, the Asia-Pacific, and the Middle East, the US projects its power directly into the world's core regions. It transforms from a distant marginal state, separated by oceans, into a close neighbor in 3 major strategic theaters. What's the benefit of this layout? Simply put, it allows the US to strike nearby, govern nearby, and contain rivals nearby. More importantly, it allows the US to divide and rule across different theaters. preventing any regional powers from integrating the area and pushing the US out. So, don't look at these bases as isolated military facilities. They are the anchors of American global hegemony, points that connect into lines, lines that weave into a web, ultimately forming a global control system. So, how many bases are there? This is actually a complicated question because it depends on how you count. In 2025, the U.S. Department of Defense's Base Structure Report claimed that there are 374 major overseas military sites. But this is a highly watered-down number. If you include drone airstrips, signal intelligence listening posts, refueling points, and port of call agreements, these micro outposts, the number instantly doubles, approaching 900. In fact, the US military hides nearly 1,000 military facilities across more than 170 countries and territories. Under the ice caps of Greenland, abandoned Cold War-era nuclear missiles launch sites that are still buried today, the number 374 are the main camps put on display. But actually, more than 800 represent the true invisible empire. The US military no longer just builds massive bases for tens of thousands of troops. They now favor a lightweight footprint. In Djibouti, Africa, Camp Lemonnier houses 10,000 troops. But in neighboring Kenya and Somalia, there are over a dozen listening stations operated by just a handful of people out of rented buildings. In the Philippines 2024, the US added 4 new bases, nominally called Joint Training Sites. They have quietly been equipped with anti-ship missiles. These ghost outposts, hidden, flexible, and hard to track, have become the new weapon of choice for US military expansion. A tour of global network. The Asia-Pacific, 42% of overseas bases. This is the most densely packed region. Japan, the largest US barracks in Asia, hosting 55,000 troops across 120 bases. Yokosuka is home to the 7th Fleet and can repair aircraft carriers. Kadena is the nest for F-35s, with radar sweeping all the way to the Taiwan Strait. Next, Guam X more like an ammo dump. Andersen Air Force Base hosts B-52 bombers. Opera Harbor hides nuclear submarines, and in 2025, it was fitted with new hypersonic missile launchers. Moreover, the Philippines, 4 new bases sit just 400 kilometers from the Spratly Islands. Foreign media refers to them as the nails pinning down the first island chain. Europe, the traditional stronghold. Germany hosts a massive military presence across dozens of facilities. Ramstein Air Base is the heart of Europe. During the Cold War, it kept 24/7 watch on the Soviets, and today it remains NATO's air hub. Italy's Naples is home to the 6th Fleet, guarding the Mediterranean. The UK's RAF Mildenhall handles Northern European surveillance. However, this old network is fraying. France refuses a permanent US presence, and Nordic countries are reducing cooperation. The US is largely leaning on upgraded bases in Poland to maintain its heavy footprint. The Middle East, the oil guard. There are 64 bases here, with one core mission, guarding the petrodollar. Qatar's Al Udeid Air Base houses 11,000 personnel and can park 100 fighter jets. During the 2024 Red Sea crisis, drones flew 10 sorties a day from here to strike Houthi targets. Turkey's Incirlik Air Base reportedly stores dozens of nuclear bombs, serving as the vital checkpoint of the Middle East. Bahrain's 5th Fleet keeps a close eye on the Strait of Hormuz, ensuring oil tankers pass through uninterrupted. Without these bases, tying the US dollar to oil would be nothing but an empty promise. How did we get here? A brief history. This overseas empire wasn't built in a day. In 1940, the US traded 50 old destroyers to the UK for 6 bases in the Caribbean, the starting point of its overseas expansion. In 1945, by the end of the Second World War, the US had over 2,000 bases globally. But instead of packing up, they turned these bases into fulcrums for controlling the world. During the Cold War, base numbers hit their peak. By the late 1980s, there were 1,139 major bases and 9 million troops forming a ring of containment around the Soviet Union. In 1968, a B-52 carrying 4 nuclear bombs crashed in Greenland. The radioactive contamination hasn't been fully cleaned up to this day. But as long as it contained the Soviets, the military didn't care. During the post-Cold War period, numbers shrank to around 800 after the USSR collapsed. But the War on Terror triggered frantic expansion into Central Asia and Africa. Back to today, with the Indo-Pacific strategy, the center of gravity is shifting to the Asia-Pacific. Upgrading Guam, expanding in the Philippines, rotating troops through Darwin, Australia, the goal has shifted from counter-terrorism to great power competition. The trillion-dollar question: where does the money go? In 2025, spending on U.S. overseas bases reached $130 billion, making up 13% of the defense budget. To put that into perspective, a Ford-class aircraft carrier cost $13 billion. That money could build 10 of them. Just feeding the U.S. overseas bases for a year cost roughly 1/3 of China's entire annual defense budget. But is this money actually being well spent? In 2023, the U.S. defense budget was $858 billion, more than the next 10 military powers combined. Yet, the Pentagon has failed its financial audit for 6 consecutive years. 61% of physical assets, weapons, parts, facilities are unaccounted for. A ball bearing with a market value of $15 was bought by the Pentagon for $3,357. Stinger missiles cost $25,000 in the 90s. Today, they cost $500,000. The war in Afghanistan ended, but the military budget didn't drop. It skyrocketed. Let's break down that $858 billion ledger. First of all, operations and maintenance. It cost $352 billion. This is the biggest chunk, exceeding the entire annual GDP of Portugal. It's the daily living expenses to keep the massive military machine running. Across 1,250 global military sites, things like utilities, equipment maintenance, and fuel cost a fortune. Fun fact, to keep morale high and homesickness at bay, the US military regularly airlifts Pizza Hut's pizza and McDonald's burger from the mainland to frontline bases. Imagine the multiplied cost of flying a pizza to a desert in the Middle East, but that's the logistical muscle of a superpower. Next, personnel costs. It cost $172 billion. This covers salaries, healthcare, and pensions for over 3.4 million active duty troops, reservists, and civilian personnel. Annual medical expenses for active duty members alone hit $39 billion. Key detail: to dominate future warfare, the military specifically allocated $28 million to recruit top-tier talent in artificial intelligence. This shows that future wars might not be about who has the biggest muscle, but who has the smartest algorithms and the fastest AI response times. To move on to the research and development costs, it is $140 billion, equivalent to Morocco's annual GDP. This money is poured into tech that sounds like it's straight out of a sci-fi movie. Think AI analyzing drone reconnaissance footage for automated target recognition, autonomous submarines that can patrol underwater for months, and infantry exoskeletons that allow soldiers to run effortlessly while carrying heavy gear. While many are still in the lab, the military is willing to burn cash to fund them. Remember, the GPS, the ARPANET, which birthed the internet, and early civilian drones all started as US military R&D projects. We are all enjoying the dividends of military to civilian tech. Furthermore, the weapons procurement, it costs $167 billion. More than Ethiopia's entire GDP, the unit prices here are wild. One F-35 stealth fighter costs $142 million, and they bought 77 of them in 2023 and ordered 83 in 2024. One cruise missile cost $1.6 million, and they bought about 600 a year. One tactical troop transport vehicle cost $372,000, and they buy over 3,000 a year. The total lifetime cost of the F-35 program, from R&D to retirement, is projected to reach $2 trillion. It is the most expensive weapon system in human history. Last but not least, for the infrastructure and construction cost, it is $19 billion. It looks small by comparison, but it's entirely strategic. For instance, spending $85 million on a new aviation fuel storage tank in Okinawa, Japan, or $75 million on a combat support center in Southern California. These small projects act as gas stations and transit hubs for rapid global deployment. The real problem: why does the cost keep rising? Behind this runaway spending is a game played by the military-industrial complex. What is the military-industrial complex? It's a closed loop of interest formed by the Pentagon, arms manufacturers, and members of the Congress. Over the past 30 years, 51 major U.S. defense contractors merged and consolidated down to just 5 giants: Raytheon, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and General Dynamics. With 5 players monopolizing the market, the Pentagon has almost no bargaining power. Whatever they quote, the Pentagon pays. Remember that $15 ball bearing sold for $3,357? Or the Stinger missile jumping to $500,000? That isn't inflation. That is the pricing power of a monopoly. How do these giants ensure the budget always goes up? The 3 main tactics are: first, the revolving door. In 2022, 672 former Department of Defense officials transitioned to high-level executive jobs at defense firms. When you are negotiating contracts with your former colleagues, of course the prices stay high. Second, the political contribution. In the 2024 election cycle, Lockheed Martin alone donated $2.7 million. Politicians who take the money naturally vote in favor of the defense industry. Third, district binding, also known as the pork barrel politics. Defense contractors strategically scatter their factories across the U.S. to create local jobs, to keep their constituents happy and secure votes, of course. Local representatives aggressively support military expansion in Congress. Even more subtly, some members of Congressional Armed Services Committees personally own defense stocks. They pass legislation, and the stock price goes up, and they profit. It's a legislate-to-profit closed loop. Oversight mechanisms? In this closed loop, they are essentially decorative. The result? Crucial domestic sectors that actually need funding. Education, healthcare, infrastructure are stretched incredibly thin, while military spending runs like a runaway train. The international bargain: who actually pays? Many assume the U.S. single-handedly pays out of pocket to protect its allies. The truth is quite the opposite. Many countries not only welcome U.S. troops but proactively open their wallets. For example, Italy. It pays around $370 million a year. Its location in the Mediterranean is vital. The U.S. has major bases in Naples and Vicenza. While Italy doesn't pay direct rent, it covers massive infrastructure costs, expanding ports, upgrading airports, and improving surrounding facilities. The Mediterranean is a major energy corridor linking Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. Italy is essentially buying regional stability, which is especially critical given recent instability and migration issues in North Africa. For Kuwait, it spends around $390 million a year. Kuwait is a small, oil-rich country deeply tied to the U.S. Since the 1991 Gulf War, this money primarily goes toward protecting oil shipping lanes. 70 million barrels of oil pass through the Strait of Hormuz daily. 30% of global seaborne oil trade. Kuwait knows that if this waterway is safe, its economic lifeline is safe. For South Korea, it pays around $1 billion a year. This number is strictly negotiated. The latest agreement requires South Korea to pay $1 billion annually from 2021 to 2025, a 13.9% increase. This is highly controversial domestically. Supporters say it's a necessary investment against North Korea's nuclear threat. Critics argue South Korea's own military is strong enough, so why keep paying? Regardless, the US forces act as a unique deterrent. For Germany, it pays around $1.6 billion a year. Germany doesn't hand over direct cash. Instead, they provide invisible contributions: rent-free land, tax exemptions, infrastructure development, and environmental cleanup fees. With 34,000 troops, it's the largest US presence in Europe. It's a historical arrangement that allows Germany to maintain security ties without touching the domestically sensitive topic of directly paying for a foreign army. For Japan, she pays around $4.5 billion a year. Japan pays nearly 3 times what Germany contributes. This covers everything for the daily operations of the US forces in Japan: base utilities, salaries for Japanese workers, training relocation fees, and even maintenance for entertainment facilities. Hosting 55,000 US troops reflects Japan's deep security dilemma against rising regional powers of North Korean threats. Here's the fascinating math behind all of this. By paying $4.5 billion, Japan saved the United States for over $30 billion. If the US military withdrew all those bases and rebuilt the same facilities on American soil, it would cost them an extra $30 billion every single year. So this is actually a massive global strategic bargain. The US provides military credibility. I've got you covered, so no one will mess with you. The Allies provide financial credibility. I will pay to host your troops, so please don't leave. Everybody gets what they need. As long as this trust system doesn't collapse, the business continues. The cracks in the empire. But more bases mean more problems. In Okinawa, US-based noise exceeds limits by tenfold. Fighter jets have crashed into civilian homes, and the local crime rate is heavily impacted. Despite annual protests and a decade of relocation negotiations, nothing changes. In Cuba, the US leased Guantanamo Bay for 120 years, paying a mere $4,000 a year in rent that the Cuban government has always refused to cash. Today, it stands as a global synonym for an extrajudicial prison. In Greenland, the Pitovik base has to rely on dog sleds for winter supplies, yet it hosts highly advanced F-35s. Locals have incredibly mixed feelings about the US military presence. Even in Germany, when the US demanded an extra $2 billion in 2024, Germany flat out said no, and even requested a reduction in base size. The patience of US allies is wearing thin. Some argue that the more bases there are, the safer America is. But the reality is that the $130 billion annual bill is a massive drag on the budget. Local anti-American sentiment kindles resentment, and the alienation of allies shakes the very foundation of this network. As an izakaya owner in Okinawa put it, the US soldiers come to eat, and the business is good, but the late-night trouble is annoying. The government says this is for national security, but what we face is real, everyday trouble. True security is not built by stockpiling weapons. It should come from stable societies, healthy livelihoods, and equitable international cooperations. Let's take a moment to reflect. How much longer can the ledger of this military empire hold up? Will the military of the future continue to expand its global web, or will it shift to a lightweight footprint, able to pull out instantly and return at a moment's notice? Can the so-called American protection umbrella survive? Will we see deeper global integration with the US military, or a massive wave of de-Americanization? Leave your thoughts and perspectives in the comment section below. Subscribe to Hello Liliana and join us as we continue tracking the latest dynamics in global current events. See you!